ThePrint off the cuff, corporate partner, AU Small Finance Bank.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Off the Cuff. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan, Deputy Editor at ThePrint, writing about the economy, finance and business. And with us, we have a very interesting personality, Mr. Shaurya Doval, who can talk to us about the interplay between politics and economics because he's perfectly positioned to do so. He has not only studied economics, he's also a CA and he's also done 2 MBAs. But apart from that, he's also a member of the State Executive Committee of the BJP in Uttarakhand. So that's where the economics, the business, and the politics comes into a perfect meld. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
Now, sir, I'm going to start with broad questions, and then we're going to drill down a little bit to sectoral levels. So I'll start with, in your perception, how is the economy doing? And do you think that the resilience that it is showing right now can continue for very much longer, given that there's so many headwinds? Oil prices are rising. There's now one more war on the horizon. There's the Israel-Hamas war, apart from the Ukraine and Russia war. And overall, global demand is falling. Do you think our resilience can keep up?
The broad answer to your question is yes. And the answer will also partly depend upon in what time frame are we speaking.
Okay.
If you look at a country's economic journey, and if you are looking at India's economic journey, then if you take a 5, 10 year, maybe a 25-year perspective of where India is heading, then there is just no problem. The Indian economy is very well positioned, it's very resilient, and it will tide over events like this.
Right.
If you take a shorter term view, then events like this will constantly keep happening. At every point in time, something or the other happens that we can call as headwinds toward the economy. Sometimes there are tailwinds, sometimes there are headwinds. Some external events keep happening. Sometimes it's COVID, before that was global financial crisis, sometimes a war, etc. So yes, we are going through a situation. Obviously, there will be some impact on this in the short run. Maybe it will impact our inflation, it will impact our fiscal situation, but it will not derail India from its long-term trajectory of transitioning into a global economy of the size and magnitude that we are all think that it will end up by the time 100 years of India's independence come up. So hence I was nuancing the question.
Right.
It depends on which time frame you're talking about.
Right. Now, the thing is that now India, either we're already the largest population in the world or we'll be there by the end of this year. And we need now decades of sustained growth to pull most of our people out of poverty. But do you feel that in this context, when we say that India is the fastest growing major economy in the world, does that mean anything in real terms, or is it just political rhetoric? Because after all, we might be the fastest growing right now, but we're still growing slower than we did in the first decade of the 2000s.
I'll again answer that question in the way that this absolutely means in real terms, in that it is that India is the fastest growing economy.
Right.
And this is not political rhetoric. Let me give you numbers to give you what you mean and why it is real. India, when the English left us in 2047, was a $30 billion economy.
Right.
India became a $300 billion economy from 30 billion after 50 years of its independence, somewhere around 1997. Right. India became a $1 trillion economy. There are only 16 economies in the world out of 200 economies that are $1 trillion in 2007.
Yes.
So it took us about 60 years. India became a $2 trillion economy by 2014. So what took it 60 years from 1947 to 2007, it did it in 7 years between 2007 and 14. Between 2014 and 19, it became what it did in 7 years, it did in 5 years, which is 3 trillion. Right. We are currently somewhere around 3.7, 3.8 trillion. In the next 10 years, by 2034, we will be about a $7 trillion economy. We are currently about 3.5. So what we have done in the last 75 years, we will actually do in the next 10 years. So when people say that India's growth, is it real? This is it. It's in front of you. Right. In absolute terms, in the size and magnitude, That is unprecedented.
Right.
And the reason this is that India is now having the advantage of what Einstein used to call the eighth wonder of the world, which is the power of momentum.
Absolutely.
At this rate, if India continues, even if you take it, you discount the growth rate between now and 2047, which will be 100 years of independence,
right,
we are talking about India's economic size of being somewhere between $20 trillion to about 40 trillion dollars. That's the bid ask.
Right.
Depending on the growth rate. So anybody who says that this is political rhetoric does not really understand that we are actually talking about absolute numbers of growth.
Right.
So, India's growth is real, it is tangible, it is reasonably predictable, and therefore the interest of the world and of Indians in being able to maintain it and sustain this growth rate. Now, obviously, from your earlier questions, there will be some times where the headwind will come, right, and sometimes we will, instead of growing at 8%, we'll grow at 7%. Instead of growing at 9%, we may go up to 5%. There may be short bursts, but the long-term trajectory lands even at a 5% growth rate at the doorstep of 30 trillion in 2047, making us the third largest economy in the world by 2047.
Right. And so you feel that this trajectory is enough right now to continuously be pulling our population increasingly out of poverty?
By default, basically, look, per capita of India today is about $1,500.
Yes.
By the time, if I take a prediction of $30 trillion, which is the downside case for the Indian economy, that divided by population of, let's say, even by, if we are 2 billion by that time, is talking about a per capita income of $15,000.
Right.
30 trillion divided by 2 billion.
Correct.
Today, the OECD rate of development of a developed country is $12,000. So, obviously, this growth is the only way, there is no other way, that will pull us Indians out of poverty. It has, in the past, in our journey from 30 billion to a trillion, 3 trillion, already pulled so many Indians out. And the extent of poverty that the world has no knowledge about. Indians between 1939 and 1947 died at the rate of 1 million people a year because of poverty and hunger. During the Bengal famine, 6 million died.
Right.
From 47, today, by the grace of God, not even a single death happens because of poverty and hunger. We went through this entire COVID. We were not short of food grain. We were not short of food. So the point being, yes, this economic growth has pulled us in the past to a certain level, but now it is going to propel us, as I said, from a developing economy at a $1,500 per capita income today,
right,
to we are staring at somewhere between $15,000 to $20,000 per capita income in the next 25 years.
Hopefully that comes out to be true.
No. This is what I was saying. This is the mathematical delivery. That is,
right,
you just have to
understand.
do that, and this is why we have to be grateful of. But we have to be conscious of the fact that the policy planners in this country have actually, particularly in the last 10 years, put very deep foundations for us to be able to sustain and build on this growth.
So now you spoke about these foundations. What would you say were the key foundations that they've set up, and possibly what are the ones that they still need to do to kind of cement this growth towards 47?
There are many things I can point to, but there is one I think that I will point to, which has become the total game changer in this. That is that in 2014, when the Prime Minister decided that I am going to start this Jan Dhan Yojana scheme,
right,
and I am going to bring a huge section of the Indians who were outside India's formal economy into the formal economy. Most policy planners and most practitioners, including bankers, thought that it was a very juvenile idea, because how would you end up bringing 500, millions of people who who neither had the funds were neither economic assets to be able to contribute to the formal economy,
or the financial knowledge,
or even the financial capital. 9 years later, today we have brought 500 million Indians into the formal economy.
Right.
These Indians today contribute even on today's date, have already put $50 billion or thereabouts in those accounts. That is the money that is standing today as the savings of these people. Now, this is without one factor that makes this economy, the foundation of this economic growth, sustainable for the future. You know why? Because when I underwrite India's growth from 3 trillion to 30 trillion, I am not predicating this on any global exports. I'm not predicating on its sudden discovery of a oil or a natural resource. Even if the whole world goes and is completely busy in the wars and continues to ignore India, actually, I don't want them to be involved with India. My own domestic market of 2 billion people with a huge workforce under the age of 35, now integrated into the formal economy, has now become an economic asset for me to be able to sustain my own growth without the dependence on the external world. So I am now more immune to external shocks and to external winds in my own economic growth trajectory.
But this, you're talking about demand for services, but what about the supplies?
So how do you free up supply? So the government started working in parallel on freeing up the supply. The first thing it did was it rolled out the GST and integrated this into a one common market. Then it started building the physical infrastructure, ports, roads, airports that would allow the supply chains that were bottled up to actually start moving. Then it started, incentivizing and creating the human capital into the supply chain. So it started increasing the number of universities, increasing the number of research, increasing the number of capital available to the informal economy to start rolling and producing products and coming into the formal economy. So various kinds of schemes like Mudra, like Startup India, Stand Up India were all aimed on providing both the opening up the what we call as the hard infrastructure and the soft infrastructure into the supply chains. Now this takes a certain amount of as a gestation period, but as you start doing this, then you start. So the demand is there because the economy is moving and there is more capital and there is more demand generating. But you're also opening up the supply lines to actually provide that to the people.
Right. So then if all of this is coming together, it stands to reason that the private sector should have started investing by now. But what we're seeing is kind of still tepid investments. Even the government, when it talks about it, it says only green shoots. Nothing is emerging further than those shoots. They're still remaining as very small saplings. So
yes, so you are right to that point that our private sectors, the expectation that the private sector would have stepped up to this opportunity to the extent that one had hoped hasn't really happened. It's not been that it has been too bad. Even if you look at in 2014-15, the private sector contribution to the private capital formation as a percentage of the GDP was somewhere between 25 to 26%.
Right. In
2023, it's about 22-23%.
Yes.
So it's not that it has come down in a meaningful way, but it hasn't really grown. Now, there could be two reasons. I'm not a practicing economist. Somebody could tell you that. But one could be that, as I said, the rate of economic underlying growth, even though it may have increased in absolute terms, the rate of the economic growth has been very significant. So the denominator has become very high, as a result of which these numbers have shrunk. But or the percentage has shrunk. Though in absolute terms, the numerator may have gone up. But I think the bigger point there is that they think there is for the private sector because it's private capital, it's very risk averse. That I can tell you as a practitioner. So it needs a lot of enabling environment to happen for it to become serious investors in either a geography or an economy. So I think now so there will always be a lag. You have to do a lot of housekeeping and cleaning and hygiene. For example, one of the things I've always held in this country, that one of the things that really, really plagues India from an economic terms is that, as long as the underlying corruption in India raises the cost of capital. Because when you invest in a country, in any country in the world, when there is malpractices and corruption, the risk of outcome of loss of capital become higher. Because irrational or economic decisions can be taken. So you raise the cost of capital.
And is the perception still that India there is corruption?
No. That is what I'm saying. As the level of corruption in India comes down, and the perception of that comes down, the cost of capital for India comes down, which then allows private sector to invest and deploy more capital. But there is a lag between the time because the private sector actually wants to see that. So now in the last 10 years, if you see whether it is coming down of corruption, whether it is predictable government policies, whether it is ease of doing business, whether it is opening up of where the private sector expected the government to provide the hard infrastructure, the road sports, as all those things open up, the general expectation is now the private sector will catch up and invest in these opportunities, and hopefully we'll start seeing private sector as a percentage of the GDP. The private capital formation as a percentage of the GDP going up.
So now drilling a little deeper into the economy, the Make in India campaign is very important to this government. They want to boost manufacturing in a big way and then also export to the world. But again, the PLI schemes have seen some amount of limited success, but overall there are several areas where they've also not met with so much success, and manufacturing, again, growth has been lower than expected. Is it time, do you think, from a policy level that maybe they should pivot to services from manufacturing? Because services is doing very well. Our services exports are strong. We're known for our services. Is that something that maybe they should do?
No, I think the past governments in this country made a colossal failure and did very great disservice to this country by allowing the manufacturing to fall from 25% of the GDP,
right,
which is the healthy number for a country of India size, to about 15% of the GDP. When we assumed government in 2014, the GDP had already fallen to 50%, the manufacturing had already fallen to 15% of the GDP.
Right.
And nobody was talking about manufacturing. Everybody was talking about services.
Right.
We were the first people that asked and put the problem on the table and said that it is our stated objective to move back this dial from 15% to 25%. Now this, in a fast-growing economy of the size of India, as I was telling you, is a humongous challenge that we have taken on ourselves.
Right.
To move the dial back from 15% to 25% of the GDP. But no country of size and magnitude, India cannot be a $30 trillion economy of any meaningful based on a service economy. Because service economy will not have the ability to absorb the kind of labor force that we are throwing out into the labor market. We are adding 1 million people to the workforce every month. That is 12 million people are coming into the workforce. So we have already inherited a situation where the patient was on their deathbed in 2014 because of so many factors, including either the foresight or, if I may say, lethargy or whatever you may call it. We allowed it to slip to 25. We missed the semiconductor. We missed the entire technological manufacturing window and the supply chains, where we missed the semiconductor cycle in the world in the early 2000s, etc.
Right.
So now we are grappling with this huge problem where we have manufacturing and we have to take it back to 25%. So the first question is, there is no way out, despite the fact that our performance in this has been tepid. I will concede that, because it is a humongous task that we are fighting. But just because it's a difficult battle doesn't mean you give up and say, no, there is, let's do services. Because that is not a way we will be able to sustain this, and we cannot continue to compete in the world. We have to do manufacturing, but we don't necessarily have to do the old kind of manufacturing. We have to get into the new areas of manufacturing. We have to get into the new frontiers of manufacturing. Such as space, such as technology, such as smart buildings, such as smart construction, the new emerging areas that will now come where as long as humans live, they will need physical things.
Absolutely.
Right? As long as humans live, they will need houses, they will need buildings, chairs, cars, etc. They will need smarter versions of that. Now there is an opportunity opening up that a sector which had been dominated by China for a long period of time and which had built huge competitive advantage in that, some window of that is opening up.
The semiconductors?
No, across the manufacturing chain, across the supply chain.
Okay.
So what we should be doing is to use that opportunity to plow back that manufacturing into the country. And go for a large scale manufacturing, which, even if it is not globally competitive to start with, actually meets our domestic demand.
Absolutely.
So that we come back into the manufacturing. We produce enough engineers, we produce enough factories, we produce enough workers. We go back and make real things. We make them smart. We don't make the dumb things because there is no demand for that.
So would you say that the first focus should be to become self-reliant before looking to export?
No, unfortunately, obviously. Yeah, but the unfortunate is that we have to do this in real time.
Right.
We have to do this in real time, right? So yes, we have to leverage the advantages that the services economy gives us because it gives us growth, it gives us capital, it gives us remittances. But we have to deploy that capital in also making in India. And therefore, when we say make in India, this is a very important, it's just not a political slogan. It's a necessity of the Indian economy. And therefore, you have a $50 billion defense budget. Every year, you cut down the list of things that are getting you cannot import, so that you force the people to manufacture. Initially, it may not be up to the standard. You can find better or cheaper versions overseas, but slowly, as manufacturing becomes competitive, we will raise back the scale. And once we get back onto the cycle of the bandwagon, then manufacturing will come back into the economy. So I personally think, again, I will caveat this by saying that I am not saying this from a purely economist point of view. I'm saying this from a purely political practitioner point of view.
Right.
That unless we really get back to making things, and we really start getting back to making our hands dirty again and learning things, tangible things. Any other model is a pure recipe for disaster. And we are already bearing the consequences of that. By 2014, we're already seeing it in 2020.
Right, absolutely. And you feel, or rather, do you feel there is any additional thing that the government should be doing to make this possible a little faster?
Absolutely. I think the government should really be making it much and much easier for doing ease of business in India, for making manufacturing even more easier for the companies and for the private sector to do.
Right. What would that look like?
That depends, a lot of that depends upon the real practice of doing things, the ease of doing business as it comes down to on the ground. Talking about the importance of manufacturing, you forget India, you look at the United States. United States is today a $24 trillion economy.
Right.
Yeah. Having outsourced their entire manufacturing to China over these years, they have now come to the realization that this is the biggest mistake that they did. And they now need to pull back manufacturing. Make in America has become important.
Right.
Now America is going to get back into manufacturing, from making semiconductors to making clothes.
But between that partnership, both of them enabled each other to grow to such levels. We are at 3 trillion right now. They're at 24 and I think 19.
Yes.
China.
Right. But you are right. And that is the thing. But the point I'm trying to make is that nobody can escape manufacturing. Nobody. So if a 24 trillion giant cannot escape manufacturing, and has to pull it back where its cost of labor, cost of land, etc. is high, because the strategic importance of manufacturing, the need to have a real economy on which is grounded your entire larger economy is so vital. That a country at India at 3 trillion should not make the mistake that it already has by thinking that only services can ride it. America does not even have the problem of a population. We even have a population of absorbing such a large workforce.
Yes.
So sooner the better, we recognize the problem and we address it. There are challenges, as we were talking about, that the challenges remain particularly on the execution of our Make in India. Our ability to still give a manufacturing environment that is conducive to the private sector remains a challenge, because our larger governance system, down to from the state governments to the municipalities, etc., is still seeped in its old ways of functioning.
And these are the functionaries that the companies actually
You
have to deal with.
This is exactly where, unfortunately, you may not have policy level corruption, but still you still have things that increase the cost of capital. You have regulation that allows them to rent seek, which makes it more difficult for business to continue to operate. Right? And I think that is hindering India's ability to be able to move the dial on its manufacturing. Now, to bring about such a large-scale change across the governance structure, across states, is a mammoth task.
Absolutely.
But I think sooner or later, the political leadership, down to the last political worker, has to understand. Whether it is chief ministers of states, whether it is MLAs, whether it is mayors, or even the parallel bureaucracy, that the more we remain seeped in our old ways, the more strategically we lose in the big game.
Right, I understand. Now, going to the interplay between politics and economics, the elections are next year, the general elections are next year. Now, in your estimation, do economic issues actually influence votes? And if so, then running up to 2024, what do you think the most important economic issues are that will likely influence votes?
I mean, the simple answer is that obviously, good. Everybody says good economics is good politics. So, always I think economics affects politics.
Right. But in a real sense, the Aam Aadmi outside, what is he thinking?
So I'll caveat by saying that yes, it does affect.
Okay.
In the larger scheme of things. So, it's that framework within which I'm talking. Now, what we are really asking, to what extent?
Right.
In a country like India, where we would like to see the sensitivity, in purely economic terms, of the voter to economic issues, we should have been far higher. Because it has a direct influence on their lives.
Right.
Unfortunately, is not that high as it should be.
Right.
Because there are a lot of external factors that break that correlation between his economic status and the way he votes. There could be issues around caste, around religion, around so many other social factors,
right,
that distort his connectivity between economic benefit and political voting. So to that extent, I think and within that, unfortunately, economic growth, which is really the panacea to his ills, is even less, because we have now this culture of freebies and distribution. So economics still affects, but it is distributive economics. It is economics about giving him subsidies, etc., giving him things free, as against increasing his productive capacity to be able to sustain that for the long run.
Right.
So that is the challenge in Indian politics, I think, that, and continues to be. I think it is becoming less and less as new generation comes in, which
meaning
is
that more aware,
more sensitive, more aspirational. They want to move up. They want better lives for themselves and their families.
And they vote accordingly?
And they are increasingly, I think, are becoming sensitive to this issue. We are at least seeing it a lot in the discourse. Right. For example, I already see a lot less people come in and attend political rallies, which is really a waste of productive labor on a working day. You see the political activity from what you used to see earlier, because today the average worker probably looks at his time value of benefit that he gets of understanding of political discourse through rallies. They can get it on a phone, they can get it on TV, they can get it through other social media, etc. So I think there is a greater sensitivity now towards understanding that time and effort is money. But it has not translated to the extent that I agree that he or she still votes on the basis of that, whose economic policies are better, what is their economic growth that they are promising, what have they actually delivered. As I said, other factors continue to come and
override these economic factors.
But then, this is democracy. Even if I look at it in developed economies of the world, even if you look at the United States, even if you look at UK, the oldest, the newest, the more developed, even there, as long as humans exist, there will be social issues.
Yes.
And they will continue to, and therefore voting will not be a pure, linear that everybody decision where everybody is an economist and they will just vote on.
But one would think about just looking at, has my income grown over the last 5 years? Am I still unemployed? Have I got a job? Those things should affect people.
That, as I said, fortunately for India and for India's economic and India's political masters, that everybody is delivering. Because you see, in India, with our economic momentum, everybody is relatively becoming better off than they were off 5 years ago.
Right.
So, invariably, the discussion is to what extent can you accelerate versus the promise of the other in delivering me. Right. Whether by giving me some preferential treatment like reservations or giving me some great subsidy package to my area. That's the debate. Nobody is arguing that, we have become worse off in absolute terms than we were 5 years ago.
Right.
Unlike many other countries, including many in our neighborhood, we are not on a backward slide. We are on an upward trajectory. So that problem is already addressed for the voter. Intuitively, who's not an economist, that yes, life is becoming better. 5 years ago, I was not getting full power. Now I'm getting 24/7 power. I've got food. I've got petrol in my car or in my motorcycle. I've got, better data on my phone. So those issues India's past those issues. Right. So I think as far as elections are concerned, the challenge remains to be able to convince the electorate and be able to prove to them that long-term policy is being put in place, long-term productive capacity is being put in place, are actually beneficial to their and their families' well-being over a multi-generational period, and therefore they must vote that party that promises that as against pure short-term delivery or short-term subsidies or short-term freebies, as the reverie culture that we call.
Right. Now, speaking about exactly that actually was my next question. There's some confusion about what the difference is between a freebie and a legitimate subsidy. Now, what would you say about, say, this government as well? When they were giving LPG subsidies to the Ujjwala scheme people, that was one thing. But now they've expanded it to everybody, even people who don't really need a subsidy. So what would you term that as?
So I think the answer to your question is that the difference between a subsidy and the difference between a freebie is that when a subsidy is like a direct, like a drug, which is directed effort to an affected portion which is suffering because of some reasons, where you expect that the drug, where a concentrated delivery of the drug will relieve the pain or the ailment and take the person out from it, and therefore they will not need it ever again.
Right.
So whether it's it's a chemotherapy or it's a very it's a targeted attack at where the problem is.
So that's a subsidy.
That's a subsidy.
Right.
Freebie is when you are buying them with a promise of a dole into perpetuity and getting them used to effectively getting a benefit for no problem of theirs, but just making it easier for them to get something without making the effort for it.
But using this analogy, then what would medicating a healthy patient be? No. Which is the LPG subsidy for the general population.
Yeah. So, of course, I am not tracking this to that extent. So I will not be able to, answer you that what exactly happened on this within the LPG scheme of taking it out. But the Ujjwala scheme was really a very targeted scheme of giving people a smoke-free environment in their house, those who could not afford.
Yeah.
And the idea was that you give them for a certain period of time. By that time, they come to that level where they voluntarily give it up.
And there was the Give It Up campaign also.
And the Give It Up campaign, and therefore you can do that. As against, that I saw in these Karnataka elections where you are giving a free ride to everybody on a bus,
right,
to just garner votes. And therefore, that I think is a race to a bottom, because the next guy will come. He'll have to give something else as a freebie. Because that's the only way you can compete out of that situation. So that's really a political challenge. And maybe in this particular case, sometimes political compulsions of one party giving freebies forces the other party to also have to do something like that to try and match it up. Because at the end of the day, it's a competitive environment. You are going out there. If we are already in this culture where somebody is offering it, and I think this is something that some of the opposition parties have been using against the BJP in the recent past. Maybe at times even forcing the BJP to react to that situation. It's not desirable, but then there is it is unfortunate situation unless you develop a political consensus that we will play this game of politics, but we will not take the country down this trajectory because this is in the long run detrimental to the country.
It costs.
It costs. At the end of the day, this cost has to be borne, and this does not increase the productive. We don't mind bearing the cost if we know that this increases our productive capacity and therefore allows us to lower the cost in the future. After all, deferred gratification is also the same thing. You study today, you bear the cost so that you may get benefits in the future.
Right.
So that is okay if that is what. But just purely doing it knowingly that we are doing it out of seeking votes, that has also historically existed in our political culture. And I think to that extent, I must give full marks to the Prime Minister that when he came into government, he actually tried to create that culture that, it says, let's give targeted assistance to people when they need, but let us really talk about increasing our productive capacity. Infrastructure, make in India, mudra loan, become entrepreneurs, don't seek jobs, create jobs, all the right things let's do. Because now it will be a travesty that, if unfortunately for political compulsions, even the BJP is being forced to go down this route. Because that is how the only way you can fight the elections. I'm sure the BJP will try to minimize it, but we also don't live in an absolute in a theoretical environment. We also have to fight elections every 5 years and win. And you saw that sometimes when, as I told you, that sometimes when we are not able to translate our policies on the ground into effective execution for the common man, we politically suffer. We lose elections, we lose state governments, makes the governance process even more difficult, makes the delivery of these bigger policies even more cumbersome on the ground.
Right.
So that's the unfortunate. That's the difficult part, I'd say,
of politics in India.
Politics in India.
Right. And so now we have a few questions that have been sent in to us when they found out that I was speaking to you. So Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, who's the founder, MD and CEO of AU Small Finance Bank, he's taking the question to the banking sector, which actually I must say the Modi government has done a very good job with. So what he asks is, as India prepares to become a $10 trillion economy, what, according to you, will be the ideal banking structure? What will be the ideal mix of private versus public banks? And will we need more banks given the recent consolidation, or will we need more bigger banks? What role do you see for differentiated banks like small finance banks, payments banks, cooperative banks, etc.?
So it's a very big question, but I think the first point is that as India becomes a $10 trillion economy, India needs a financial system that is commensurate with a $10 trillion economy.
Right.
India's financial system needs to evolve in line with the size of our economy and its complexity of that size.
Right.
No global no global economy in the world, and we can take America as an example, has that large size unless it has a financial system which is effectively the nerve center of the economy. So now if you look forward and we plan India's move from a $3 trillion to $10 trillion economy, we are looking at a financial system that one thing we know clearly is going to be heavily dependent on technology. So we need banks, whether in public or private sector, that are leveraging technology to give financial awareness and financial products to the end customer, and use technology to move capital around from the net savers to investors. So I think technology becomes one big important part. Second thing I believe is that these banks or the financial system will have to do increasingly what we call as the sustainable financing, because as India's economic growth happens, we need a banking system that is more or less in line with the SDG goals. So the old banking system, which was just about lending to everybody or taking money from everybody, will have to reorient itself with larger social goals. So that's the second thing. Third thing I see the banking system have that its ownership can be public or private, that is less important, but whatever it has to be, the ownership aside, its management has to be world class.
Absolutely.
Its management has to be world class. Therefore, it must be able to provide banking service and solutions that are world beating, because if Indian banks don't do it, other people will come and capture it, whether through technology or whether through greater financial power. And then obviously in the fourth thing I'd add is that as I think of the future banking system, I think of India's banks being not just good enough to provide banking solutions to India, but India being a major player, which is today it is not, in the global financial system. That is today, America is strong not because the American economy is just 24 trillion, because the entire financial system of the world is rooted through the SWIFT system into the American dollars.
Yes.
Right? So America literally controls the global financial system. If India doesn't want to control it yet, but has to be a significant player. Now, today we are very small percentage of the global exports. So our share is small. But we have to design a financial and a banking system that plays a very significant part in a $30 trillion economy.
Look ahead, basically.
Look ahead. And that is why, this whole thing about RuPay and about Indian rupee going about and building an alternative to SWIFT is an attempt in that direction.
Right.
So I think India's financial system should now really be thinking about how it builds itself for the future. And for the future of a large $30 trillion or a $50 trillion economy.
So now one of our subscribers, Mr. Hari Rao S., he asks quite a politically loaded question. He says, over the decades, some states are consistently underperforming with poor development and high misuse of public money. Is this not a drain on the country's economy? Is the central government really serious in tackling this problem? And if so, how?
I think it's a very, very pertinent question.
Yes.
And this is a very real question, because he is absolutely bang on. That when we look at India's economic growth rate, 6%, 7%, it's not that all of India is growing at 6-7%.
Right.
Even as non-economies. There are states and parts of India which are growing at 11-12%. And then there are states of India which are growing at 2-3%. And on average, India is growing at 6%. So therefore, the divergence between certain states and other states is actually widening. And this remains a very serious problem for policy planners, that how do you bring about a balanced growth? Particularly when sometimes even the votes are skewed in favor of states that are not the best users of public money and not the ones that are delivering the best growth rates for its people, for economic growth rates. I think so there is an acceptance, I think, that this challenge is there. I think some of the ways the government has done in the past, the recent past, has been one is to build competitive federalism in this country. They are trying to make the states compete with each other and hoping that, the innate Indian talent for trying to outstrip the other will actually help the states compete with each other in a positive trajectory.
Right.
So our chief ministers across states are now globally seeking foreign investment, seeking domestic private investment, wooing industry, asking for jobs, giving their competitive advantages.
Right.
So that's one way of doing it, that you start creating a competitive culture within the states of economic competitiveness as one thing. Secondly is that you have to do a lot of hand-holding and support to some of the states that, as I said, have been left behind, particularly our northern states, in this economic journey. There are many, many social issues, including huge issues of colonization, that have forced certain states where the colonial influence was higher versus the other states, that have led the human index so much behind that it is taking us time to do the catch-up game.
Would you be willing to name some of these states?
No, we all know the states. Many of the states are in our northern India, whether it is, Bihar, whether it is Madhya Pradesh, whether it is UP. I mean, obviously these are...
the usual, the Bimaru, so-called Bimaru states.
Bimaru. I don't think that's the right word, because that word always brackets them into saying that, oh, you are condemned to this state.
No, of course.
That was a wrong... What we should be telling them is that by saying that We understand their unique problems. And as I said, we assess them in time-bound manner to bring their competitiveness to a level where they can start competing with the other states. And they've reached an inflection point where we can leave them on their own to be able to catch up.
Right.
UP is a great example. Look at UP's example. UP, large state, lot of plagued with problems. You get a chief minister about 7-8 years ago who understands the importance of doing this.
Right.
What does he say? He says, but how can industry invest in my? How can there be an economic growth when I do not provide a safe environment for industry to operate? So the first thing he does, he gets his law and order in place. Now besides the social aspect, that's a big tick in the economic box. You can't invest, you can't have economic growth when you don't have peace and stability and the rule of law.
Right.
Right? Now a certain state like Bihar hasn't even sorted whether it wants to do that or not want to do it. Right? Even if it's a priority or not priority. And forget whether enforcing it is, the chief minister is not even saying it's a priority. Right? He is talking about caste census and he's talking about all other issues. None of them will solve the issue of economic growth and a better life for his people. They may solve the issue of identity and they may solve the issue of empowerment. But, that discussion, rest of India has moved on.
Absolutely.
In the last 75. And this is not a discussion you want to keep your people tied up in. You want to start to move towards where the future is. So, state like UP is one example where I can think where the chief minister's in his first tenure, peace, rule of law. And now in his second state is really going out of the way to attract investment and upskilling his people, providing industry the advantage, the opportunity to come there and creating a conducive culture where, sort of keeping away the Jones from district to district will allow people to compete, set up industry, create the supply chains, create the infrastructure, etc.
And hopefully that will translate into growth.
And that will translate to bring UP at a certain stage where suddenly it will say, oh, now I can even also compete with the other states that are ahead of me. See, think of it like India, right? When we were at 300 billion, we weren't thinking about competing with America because we were thinking, oh, we are still so poor. Then suddenly we became $1 trillion and we came in the top 20. Then we said, now we are in the game. Then we were 3. We said we are not in the top 5. Now though we said if number 3 is in sight, nobody can stop us. Yes. So it is a very human psyche. If you are the last guy in the class, you don't want to study, there's no chance. But if you come in the top 10, then you are suddenly motivated yourself to move up and go. So the effort of the government should really be to try, and the state government should try and move their states, that the whole country moves into the top 10. Now every of the 30 states are trying to compete for the first 10 states, and nobody thinks that, oh, we've lost. The Bimaru concept was that, oh, you are already a condemned person. You are a failure, you can never pass. Right? So, let's not do anything about it.
Absolutely.
And this still plagues some of the politics of some of these states. Some of the states like UP, as I said, have been able to break out of it.
Rajasthan as well.
Rajasthan as well to some extent, yes.
Right. So now on that note, thank you so much, sir. This was an absolutely fantastic discussion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show.
ThePrint off the cuff, corporate partner, AU Small Finance Bank.